Hello, hello. Happy Sunday to you all, and welcome to Conversations About Abstraction number 7 with Alicia Piller and Rebecca Niederlander. We're really excited to have you here today as we continue this series. Please know that this presentation is for educational purposes only. It is being recorded and will later be posted at the Conversations About Abstraction YouTube page by this coming weekend. All of the comments, ideas, and observations and analysis of any of the work are the intellectual property of the participating artists. Please don't record this conversation, distribute it, copy it, publish it, or sell it without the consent and or express permission of the participating artists and Conversations About Abstraction. And any individual recording of this presentation is prohibited. Our next conversation will take place on December the 12th with textile artists Victoria May and Brenda Mallory. We're really excited about that conversation. Alicia Piller is a Los Angeles-based artist who was born and raised in Chicago and earned her bachelor's in both fine arts and painting and anthropology from Rutgers University in 2004. While working in the fashion industry and living in New York for a decade, and 3.5 years in Santa Fe, New Mexico, she cultivated her distinctive sculptural voice, and probably cultural voice. Continuing to expand her artistic practice, she completed her MFA, focused on sculpture and installation from CalArts in 2019. As a method to locate the root of human histories, she merges the new and discarded, experimenting with a wide range of materials to construct large-scale works that mimic forms of cellular biology. What's really also interesting is that she has a history of working in, where did I read this? And I don't think I added here. Tell me, Alicia, isn't it in, in fashion costuming? But I think specifically with, I want to say circus clown work.
I don't know. This little buzz about me has been going around. Yes, I was a clown. I was a clown for 7 years, from 7 to 14 years old. So,
wow.
And that was with my mom. She was the real clown. I was the assistant. But that's where the element of balloons, that sort of me bringing that into the fold of my works, comes into play.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Her work has been collected by the Hammer Museum and the Glendale College Collection, the Forrest Kirk Collection, and the Pam Royale Collection. And her work was featured in Full Bleed in the issue 10 in fall 2019. When I post the conversations, I will post both her long bio for you all. Rebecca Niederlander. One thing you guys should know about Rebecca is that if you ever do a studio visit with her, she will have the best snacks. So I'll start her intro with that. She is a native Angelino, and she's a visual artist, curator, and writer. Her sculptures and site-specific installations are data visualizations that use repetition and the inherent nature of the materials to address the individual's position within the larger intergenerational community. She also co-founded the social practice Broodwork, which investigated creative practice and family life through exhibitions, lectures, written projects, public art, and events. Her recent projects have included There's a Nova in the Bed Next to Mine, and an official project for the 56th Venice Biennale in Italy, the solo exhibition with a solo exhibition at Axis Mundi at the St. Louis Museum of Contemporary Religious Art, various public art projects for the LA County Arts Commission, and 2 site-specific projects for the Los Angeles International Airport. Will you please join me in welcoming both Alicia and Rebecca to the conversation? So, ladies, let's start with a question that might seem really, really simple. And that question is, why sculpture?
Nice. I'll go first.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited, and it's just been such a pleasure to really get to know Rebecca. We've had multiple studio visits, and I plan to hang out with you some more. So,
Yeah.
but okay, so for me, sculpture, honestly, if you would have asked me this, I would, like 20 years ago, I would be shocked. I would say absolutely no sculpture. Like, I don't even know where that would be coming from. I thought I was going to be a painter. Um, painting was definitely like just my focus. And then somehow, living in New York, I needed money, and I started to focus more on my crafts. And my crafts at the time happened to be making jewelry, sculptural jewelry, and hand painted clothing. So diving into that world of fashion sort of pushed me into this world of materiality that I never ever expected. I mean, I've always been drawn to materials in general, like collecting tchotchkes and things like that, but I never would have thought I would put them together in a sort of in any sculptural form. So um going into fashion, as much as I sometimes hate that I did, I'm so glad that I did, because I really needed that time to figure out what I was interested in. And so for me, that is about um, how do you create something that can give you a sense of, history, of science, of a trauma through using, for me, multiple materials in one. So I feel like sculpture allows me to kind of find the energy around something in a way that's so different than just me painting. So I feel like sculpture for me is just like this opening. Like, I get to push myself to the limit in so many ways, that I need that for somebody like me. I'm a workaholic, and I'm also just like constantly experimenting. And I think I was limited in the painting world. So, yeah, it just, I'm a sculptor now. I can't believe it.
Rebecca?
Um, so my first degree is journalism, and I am also a writer and an essayist. But when you go to journalism school, you learn about this thing supposedly that exists in the world. It's called objective truth. And as I was writing stories in college and post college, I began to feel that there really was no such thing as the objective truth. I mean, it is deeply, profoundly stressed. Short words, to the point, get your message, communicate the needs of the story. And I began to realize that my favorite stories were actually human interest stories, where I could delve into interviewing a person and asking them what their experiences were in the world. And that those were obviously biased because I'm communicating their story. And then I was also making art at the same time. And I think originally my work had a lot more it was never really realistic. It was always slightly abstracted. But as I went more and more, it became obvious to me that the conversation was never going to be one of objective truth. And so the art became the full experience, but also how we experience the work how others experience the work that we make was totally imbued by their own experiences. And I love the idea. I come out of both, my family of origin is both Catholic and Jewish and sort of non-denominational Christian, but I spent a fair amount of time in Catholic churches and cathedrals. And I actually am not a native Angelino. I'm from St. Louis.
Okay.
So
Alicia
Alicia and I have talked, and we'll talk a little bit more maybe about being Midwesterners and being out here, what it means to be a transplant. But Catholic churches are really all about how objects are imbued with the Spirit of God, and that those objects, that they are God on earth. And so I think that for me, it was never a question of whether it was going to be 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, because to me, that I just like, it's in my blood, right? That objects have this ability to connect on a profound level.
Well, Alicia, you earlier talked about energy, right? And I think you phrase it about, that sculpture allowed you to create this energy or understand, commune with, you didn't use commune, but I am, energy around something. Can you expand a little bit more on that when you refer to energy and what you feel, what moves through you to make these sculptures?
Yeah, so for me, I've always been, I mean, this really goes into that aspect of religion that Rebecca's talking about. I'm not religious, and I'm also like, born half Jewish, half, my mom was Baptist, all these things, but I I came into sort of spirituality on my own terms through some ghostly events, but also I feel very connected to my ancestors. So for me, I grew up with a lot of objects that were really special to the family, like an old Singer sewing machine or
Mhm.
a mandolin that we've had since the 1800s or something. I always had these objects that I could go to that I felt really lucky to have it, be able to touch
Mhm.
and experience. And so that has carried forward into just how I collect objects, how I'm when I'm sourcing things. I'm a lot of times making an actual object, but a lot of times I'm on the street and I see something that inspires me or that I'm like, oh my God, that shape.
Mhm.
But more than that, those objects have history. No
Yeah.
matter where they come from, if they're trash, they have history. So I like to consider whatever that history of the object is, that object has an energy about it,
Mhm.
and what does it mean to take these individual objects and piece them together into one form? And there's a magic that happens, there's a spiritual element in just the making. And then this sort of alchemic moment happens when you finish it and you get, and people are experiencing it. And so yeah, it's really, I just really believe that, you know, everything around us is holding energy. And sometimes it's bad, and so sometimes I'm trying to work through these sort of dark energies as well when I'm making a piece. So yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious about something, and I don't want to take it too far away from sculpture, but since you talked about energy, and as we look at this piece here, how much of this is found acquired material? How much of it is not? What does it feel like? When do you know? How do you recognize the energy in a material, an object that you found, and whether it will be included or not? If
Yeah,
there's a particular piece you want me to go to, let me know as well.
okay. No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Actually, this piece has mostly, there's hardly any found.
Mhm.
Maybe some trimming that my mom might have shipped to me. I have a lot of people that give me like boxes of stuff for me to work with, which I'm so grateful for. But I repeat the question. I'm so sorry. I'm sort of
Um,
looking at the sculpture
no,
like,
no, no, it's okay. What I'm curious about is I am curious about the material, but I'm interested in, you talked about the energy and using found objects as well. And one, and maybe it's not related to a particular piece here. What does it feel like? When do you
oh, how do I
recognize
know?
the energy of a piece? How do you know?
Right,
Right?
right, right.
Let's
Okay,
just say
so
you find a shoe and you're like, I want to include this, but do you touch it? Do you work with it? Is it not working? Is that when you identify that it's bad energy or good energy?
yes.
How does that?
Okay. So okay, I'm so sorry. So
That's okay.
basically there's this process that I have in terms, it's almost like putting a puzzle together because
Mhm.
there's the level of me collecting, there all the pieces are here, but then all these sort of beginnings of a sculptural form are around me, and I have to, if I have an idea, that puzzle starts to come together once I'm just like, okay, I'm putting all the shapes in front of me. I don't know what I'm going to do with you yet, but they start to literally tell me what they want, and for this particular sculpture that you're looking at now, this was actually about my maternal DNA.
Mhm.
And so I was really thinking a lot about, at that time when I was making this, about this DNA helix and this probability of existence. So sometimes, as for this piece in particular, it was the form was derived from me already being interested in like this visual image of DNA. And then in the midst of that, I'm utilizing 4 generations of my maternal side, like photographic images. So I'm trying to give you these clues. But that's not always how it happens. Sometimes it's just very organic, and I like have these objects and pieces in front of me, and I need to, it's like, again, putting a puzzle together. How does it work? And that energy happens when it works, when I can I see it and I'm like, oh my god, that's it, you know. And it's a quick process. It's like, let's keep it moving. And it happens like, sometimes it's scary, you know, to piece these things together. I feel always a fear in the beginning, and I hate that. But I also, it's like a roller coaster ride. You're like,
Is
I'm
the fear
scared.
is the fear in the unknowing?
Yeah,
What
like
that means?
it's, I just feel like it's not, somehow not good enough. Somehow I'm like questioning it, the whole thing. I'm like, how can I do this? How can I make this giant thing? And then there's some breaking point that happens, because I still push forward through that fear, and I let that fear just, you know, I let it happen.
You know, I have to say, I appreciate, and I'm sorry for Rebecca if you were going to say something. I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable, because I think it's something that many creatives, makers, artists experience. And being in the studio, making something that resonates with you, that you feel proud of or wonderful, or you know it's great, or having these doubts like, what am I doing? Why am I here? I'm making these paintings or sculptures and they're nothing, they aren't good. And, you know, we go through this range of emotions.
Yes.
And to hear you say this, your work has been collected by the Hammer. You are constantly, you're showing your work. People obviously are resonating with it. But to hear you say that, to know that, it's very human of you and vulnerable, and I appreciate that. I do want to get to material, but Rebecca, do you have what are your thoughts with combating or acknowledging that within your own work?
Acknowledging the fear of failure.
Well, it could be fear of failure, yeah, or any self-doubt that you
Um,
may have.
I think, I mean, I have screen grabbed a couple of memes, you know, where it's like, you know, the artistic process is idea. This idea is awesome. I'm going to start making. This idea is complete shit. What the fuck was I thinking? I can't even imagine that I
I,
thought I could do this. Then you get through that, and then you're like, oh wow, this is actually really good. And I think that that is just I think that the creation of any object that an artist makes, if they are honest about it, every single time there is some aspect of that process, because we are trying to communicate with other people. We are reaching out. Making art is a very vulnerable occupation.
yes, it is.
It is perpetually putting the self in front of others. And I'm not entirely certain why criticism has gotten to the place that it's at, where it's more about like whether or not something is good or bad, as opposed to what were the messages that were attempted to be communicated.
Mhm.
And how, you know, like there are other ways we could handle criticism, like within the press. Because I think that what we're doing is, I mean, I think that every single time I attempt to make a thing, it's like the entirety of the lived experience of being alive consolidated into a short process.
Right.
Right. I mean, that is what life is. We are perpetually like, who do I want to be? What do I want to be? What do I want the messages? Who do I want to spend time with? Who do I want to connect with? Like, that is what life is, right? And then there's failures and there's successes at that. And that's what we do, is put it out there. And so I think that anyone who's not willing to acknowledge the nausea that comes at some point in a project is just lying.
I agree with you. And it's so funny when you mentioned about the screen grab earlier. I was looking through my phone because I believe you found it. Did you see that on Instagram? I saw that one on Instagram. I related to it so much. The little stick figure that's having all of these emotions, right, in the making process. Thought it was
Yes.
hilarious. Okay, so let's talk about that. And thank you for that, for both of you for sharing that. So let's talk about material. Alicia, you're using latex balloons and vinyl and resin. And Rebecca, you're using wood and steel, and a lot of your work incorporates wood. Can you talk to us about what it is about wood, and then Alicia, latex and the vinyl and the resin? What resonates you? Why this material at this time in your practice?
So the wood came about originally because I was doing, like, my kid is in LAUSD, and of course there's never enough art experiences for kids in public school. And so I started doing a lot of coming up with, classes and taking materials, providing everything, and then doing the things with the kids in the classes. And one of the artists, I also found that if kids knew about any artist, they knew about male artists, and I thought that was pretty punk. And so I began a push to teach them about female identified people. And one of the people I was really interested in them understanding was Louise Nevelson, because she is someone, when you've got a group of kids, 85 of which are eligible for free or reduced lunches, and you're teaching them about art, you can't teach them about, doing oil on silk or something. Like, there's never going to be the money for that. Right. So part of it is also teaching them about how to use what's around you. And Nevelson is such a great example of using reclaimed wood and making these just profound works, right? And so I started doing that. And I had a couple of friends who were woodworkers, and I'd get scraps from them, and we started doing these projects. And then I started teaching them also about Martin Purrier and Deborah Butterfield, and and then I was like, this wood is pretty darn interesting and beautiful. And I got a little bit selfish, and I started playing with it myself. Like, what did it mean to me? And Alicia, you were talking about spirituality, and we've talked about this. Before I started the wood projects, I was doing, one of the kinds of work I was doing was these digital projects. I was really curious about sculptural materials, right? Like, every sculptural material is at some point either a distinct object, like a shoe or a balloon, or it's just a lump of wood or a block of clay or a piece of steel, right? And I became profoundly curious about, when does a material develop a soul? When does it go from just being, a block of wood to being a sculptural object that people connect with and that they want to communicate with the artist or each other about and, own, right? Like, when does this material go from being just a thing to making that profound connection with others? And so when does the soul enter it? And so with the wood, I started, and this goes back to my journalism background, I started interviewing woodworkers. And the whole wood series is called the Pilgrimage series, because I went back to the original people that I knew already and who trusted me. And the question I asked them was, did you grow up with a spiritual practice? If so, what was it? And what do you do now, if you do anything? And how do you think that relates to your use of wood? And then we would have like this hour or two long conversation, and it ended up being like the kinds of conversations we all had in our freshman year in the dorms at college, and then like never went back to, because we learned that polite people don't talk about religion, because but it was really great. And people, like the woodworkers, were like, wow, I haven't thought about these things. And so then I would say, okay, well, do you have anyone else that you want me to meet? I can have that conversation. Oh, and then after we had the conversation, then I would take whatever scraps of theirs they had, right? And then I bring it home. I'm in my studio, so I can show you. Everything is organized and boxed, relating to size or shape. And then I sit with it and I look at it and I think about what it tells me. And the rubric is that I'm not allowed, even though I have a full wood shop, I'm not allowed to alter the wood at all. And the idea behind that is that, like, if someone hands me a scrap, you know, like this, like, that's super gorgeous already, right? Like, and what is it? How did this? And so it's kind of a meditative practice of studying the wood and then figuring out how the wood wants to be reconnected with other wood in a new community. I think of them as like new cities. And then each one is completely unique and different based on, you know, for lack of a, for no idea of a less woo-woo phrase, what the wood tells me.
Well, you both phrase it that way, and I've heard other artists say it, and I've said it myself. Alicia said it right, that the materials tell her what to do, what the wood is telling
Absolutely.
you. I'd love to know, is there or do you recall a moment when you realize this material object, this material itself, has made a profound connection with others, whether that's yourself, or another piece of wood while you're working? Can you tell us about a memory of remembering that? And what did that feel like? When did you know?
There was one woodworker who, an older guy, and he was like, my studio is just kind of everywhere. Why don't I bring the wood to you and we'll do the interview in your studio? And we sat, and he was a friend of one of the guys. So we'd been connected, right? And we sat down, we started having a conversation. And as we were talking about, like, as we were extrapolating out his connections to spirituality throughout the course of his life, because he was in his early 70s at that point, he started getting teary. And he talked about having been a Vietnam vet and what it was like to come back from that, and how the wood actually changed him. It was like one of those getting him out of PTSD kind of a things, right? And that that he hadn't really acknowledged that until our conversation, just what the working with wood, working with nature, getting completely outside of those dramatic experiences of war, what it had done for him. And he was just like, can we do this every week? You know? And that was when I realized that we have so many stories to tell each other, if we actually take a minute and actually ask the questions. And I think that art is frequently the conduit by which we initiate those conversations.
Thank you. I'm curious about the questions you have for each other, or the questions you asked each other during your studio visits. Alicia, what? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say about my own materiality. You'll see with every piece, I am to the tiniest bead to the biggest shape gets wrapped in this vinyl. And so in my past, that was leather. Sometimes it was recycled green screen. But I'm using this sort of, and now it's vinyl just because it's easy and I can get colors and, it's malleable. So it becomes kind of like this clay for me, but also it becomes the skin. It becomes the membrane surrounding each and every component. And that is how, because I really do think of them as these organisms that, even if I'm talking about colonialism or slavery, the actual sculptural object becomes its own organism. And so that, vinyl skin and membrane really becomes key to every work, no matter if I'm using balloons or if I'm using paper, if I'm using photography, a shell or whatever. And like in this work, I'm using banana. I do a lot of like urban hiking. And so I'm just walking in my neighborhood in Inglewood and I see banana, this banana plant, all the petals are falling down. And I just collected, in that moment, I was like, this is a beautiful form. I collected them, let them dry. and then put them to the side for months. And then for this particular work, they just happened to fit and be the right shape. But again, all wrapped in the vinyl. And so even though I'm adding these elements of the balloons, which, you know, stem from my past, they kind of, for me, become more of this bodily form. They're kind of gross sometimes. They're kind of intestinal. And I do kind of like to play with this sense of like beauty and sort of like, what is this? You know, so it's almost like it gets you more like you're dissecting it a little bit. You have to come up close to it to see like, what is this, you know, and what is this tiny shape? So I do really like to play with that, the zooming in and zooming out of, you know, seeing a piece. And sorry, yeah, that was just really what I wanted to touch on with the, oh, and then I wrote a note, for one, I don't even think I have a picture, I'm so sorry, but I did a giant gown of my grandfather's slides. And that was a really special sort of sculptural object for me to make, because we had to clean out their house, my grandparents' house, and they lived there for over 40 years. It was, you know, really sad actually to do this, but it was like I was in their world. I was in my grandfather's mind, looking at all. I digitize all the slides. You know, I really care about each object, no matter how insignificant it may seem. So I digitized every one, which was pretty interesting. I was like, oh, my grandfather, he's so sweet. A little boring. All of them were like flowers and stuff, but it was still really like special to take these all of these little memories and combine them into a new form. So even though, yes, I have signature materials, the things within change. It's always changing.
Yeah, I saw your work for the first time at, oh goodness, it just lost me. The space, it's now on Washington, but it was on Adams. And that's when Full Bleed had a launch during your show as well. Maybe that was the issue that you were in.
Yeah.
And I remember walking in and seeing the work and thinking, well, first of all, who is this? I haven't heard of her, and her work is amazing. Like people just seem to show up, although you're here. And so I was really intrigued, but I found myself, you know, you have to step, and there was a really large piece in the center. I don't think we have an image of it now, and I'm sure you remember which that one that was, but you have to take a step back to really take in the entire work. And then you are really pulled in, drawn in to look at these photos and identify these objects. And there's just so much to take in. I love the idea that it definitely feels it's a macro and micro experience, right? And I love the idea when I read about your work as well, that it is informed by this cellular biology and this DNA, and it feels that way, right? I didn't know how to articulate it, but when I read it, I said, wow, it makes so much sense, because you feel that way, that there's so much of you in this history, within the history of objects, and you know, the stories that make up all of these things, the energy. I mean, it is like this DNA, this cell that has been enlarged. Like I'm looking in this microscope, right?
Yes. I love that you're seeing my vision.
I will say, and this is on me, a comedic moment, you guys. I did read the title as "Blindly Dismissed, Soaking in Wonton Juice."
Oh,
I mean, so
you're just making me
hungry. I'm like, maybe that was it, right? And I wasn't wearing my glasses. Okay, so yeah, so why don't you guys share with us about meeting each other? And I'm really curious about the questions you have for each other. And I know that you guys had time to talk together, but you know, kind of let's rewind and take us on this little trip where we can be the bird at the window listening to or on the branch listening to your conversation when you guys had your studio visit.
Amazing. Well, like I said earlier, we had such a great, both visits were really great. I was so impressed with just being able to experience. I had no idea when I got to Rebecca's house, she was going to drive me over to one of her installations. And I was like, oh my God, it was magical. I mean, just getting to experience one of her, I mean, it's still sculptural, but one of her installations, walking in it, walking under it, looking up. I mean, it was literally this extension of a tree. Oh, I wish we had an image of it, but there's a lot on Instagram, and seeing it in person was so important. It was just the feeling that I got was just the sense of like joy, really. But I'm gonna go first with the question. Let's see here.
Go for it.
I'm curious about, this is kind of we'll start with a simple one. How does color play into your work? Because I know you have this, you're using a lot of wood, and a lot of times the wood stays the same, but I've seen you definitely do some other works that are like paper, different materials that are color. So,
Like that.
yeah, I know. My first job. I was like, that was great. So yeah, what role does color play?
I'm on it. I'm listening.
I know. I'm like, you're on it.
Well, the question about color was one that you and I spent quite a lot of time on. I don't know that we got to like a definitive for either of us. But you were talking before about everything has a thing, and I mean, I have long been fascinated by color theory, right? Whether it's Goethe or Renaissance, whatever, or Aboriginal or anything. I mean, color has meaning, right? And it's but it is particular to each of us, in the same way. I think the designer from your fashion world, Diane once said something along the lines of hot pink is the navy blue of India, which is wrong and colonial, but it's important to recognize, or like red has a very different meaning in our culture versus in Chinese culture, right? And so I think it's fascinating to play with color and just open it up. I think that it's a really amazing way to play with abstraction, because each of us does have a particular bent on color. I have like, it's a brain thing where I have like sensitivities to color. And so certain colors are actually like painful to me. And each of us has a feeling about certain colors, whether it's like represents an item of clothing that we loved that our grandmother wore, or a hand towel or something, right? And so, this is a great piece to talk about color. Okay, so this piece is called A Snowball's Chance. And you can see that it was made in 2016. It was for an exhibition in the Bay Area in December of 2016, and I was pissed, right? I mean, Trump had just won, and I was pissed. I was just so angry, and I didn't know what to do with that sense. And I thought, I can't let all of that toxicity own me. And so for this piece, I made this very hard-edged structure that had various shades of gold and metallics. And then there's not a picture of it here. There is on my website. And then off to the side, there was an acrylic box that had a whole bunch of folded paper in pinks and purples and blues, very much blues. And the idea, this space was at the bottom of like a 7-story circular staircase. And so everyone who visited was invited to take a piece of paper and a scissors and cut a paper snowflake of their own creation, and then like drop it from on high or toss it in. And the idea was that all of this blue and blue energy would overwhelm and eventually crumple the gold. which I thought of as like Trump Tower.
Mm.
And by the end of it, as you can see, it was pretty overwhelmed. And that was a way that I use color, you know, in a way that we talk about it. And that's always interesting to me because one of my besties is an artist who lives in England, and she's like, yeah, over here, red is what you want to be and blue is the Tories. And so she, you know, it's fascinating how we can always have these conversations about color, but we have to actually ask each other like how we interpret color, right? And I know you've got a whole idea of that. I mean, that was one of our questions, like you too, Alicia.
Wait, but also want to know, what's the color that you can't look at? Just curious.
Certain neon colors.
Oh, okay,
Oh.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, certain neon colors are actually painful in my brain.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay. All right. I will never wear neon around you. Not that
I
I have
appreciate that, my love.
So for me, I've been really trying to tackle this color question because we talked about this. Like, I definitely don't think of color first. It's always shapes and forms first, and then later I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of pink in this that I didn't even think about, and it's weird. It's weird to say that because there will be certain things that are very distinctively colored in a certain way, but like it's just not my first thought in a piece. But it kind of just happens as I'm going. Like, okay, what this piece next to this shape, does it work? And so the visual elements coming together are what tell me if the color's okay, if that makes any sense. But I also too, I just did this show, or I just have a piece, an installation at El Segundo art museum, and the show is called Blues. And so almost, majority of the works are blue. And for me, for that work, I was really thinking about the ocean, but that was interesting because I already had so much blue in my, like, so many components in my studio to work with. And I was like, why do I have so much blue already? So I was really kind of like trying to figure it out. And I realized, like, I am a lot of times working with looking back at history and understanding how did we get to where we are today in the US. So red, white, and blue is always on my mind, not on my mind, but just like in the work. And and so I feel like it happened. I just so happen to have so many things that have elements of red, white, and blue. Maybe the red is pink. Maybe the blue is baby blue. But it's all stemming from me kind of like sourcing this history, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how do I think about color. It's complicated.
So I have a question. If we're looking at this piece here, you kind of have this frontal train, if that's for lack of a better description, you might refer to it as something else. And so in the center portion of this wearable sculpture that you have, we see these really interesting kind of organic shapes that you've created. We do see color of it's predominantly white, and then there's a little bit of blue near the knees, turning into red, maybe some yellow. So when you're creating this piece, you're not aware of color at this time. It's really about the shapes. And then as you're
No, actually for this piece, so actually this work was part of my sort of quarantine, like all 2020 things I made during 2020.
Mhm.
And I was working with like these masks and different wearable forms, but that train that you're seeing that's coming down the middle is a chronological sort of news headlines
Mm,
from January 2020 to all the way to December.
mm,
So I was thinking about the dates.
okay.
And what I did to find those images, though, I'm always sort of my part of the practice is research. And I'm like always just like hunting for images or taking my own or and then collecting them in files, So I was just on all the news sites, like what are the news headlines that kind of emotionally were triggering. And either happy or sad. A lot of it was sad during 2020, but that was the method of the coloring, you know.
I have a question
Yeah.
based coming off of that one, Alicia.
Yeah.
And I think it's something we talked about a little bit, and I think it's a really important part of abstraction is how you you have a lot of heavy topics in your work, and a lot of big ideas, right? And there's a lot of emotion, right?
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk some about emotion in abstraction and like how, I mean, color is obviously one way we communicate that, but how do you, yeah, your thoughts around like communicating emotion without words?
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of my practice. I feel like I'm trying to decipher my own emotions, because I'm a lot of times tackling, like you said, these big topics or traumas in history. And so it becomes like twofold, where I'm, I don't want to call it a therapy, a art therapy, because I feel like that sums it down a little bit. But like, yeah, there's some element of me working through my own emotions through working laboriously on a piece. And there's a part, maybe an escapism in that as well, because a lot of times when I'm doing sort of these, let's say the wrapping part of the work, it's very time consuming and very monotonous. It's like the same thing over and over. And so I will allow myself to sort of get lost, like in a show. Like I will allow myself to get lost in a podcast. But I mean, I'm still in the work. Depends on the what part of the work I'm doing. But yeah, I feel like, and then when it comes to viewers, I want you to, um we had a question about storytelling, and this sort of plays into that. I want the viewer to feel something, and a lot of times, I'm getting you by like, ooh, it's so intricate, it's so intriguing, it's so maybe pretty. But then you have to step into that and you're like, oh, but there's a news headline about something awful in there, and so I'm like playing with your emotions a little bit to get you to open your eyes.
Yeah, yeah. I feel very much the same way. Like in that the Walden piece, which is the wire forest,
Yeah.
that piece was about gender. And you and I've talked a lot about gender and sexuality and like how we can discuss these things, right? That are super important and that are really pivotal. And I talk about in that piece that um, all of that wire is pink and blue and white and gray and black. And the idea is that those are the colors of the transgender. Well, pink and white and blue are the colors of the transgender flag. And that a person very close to me came out as trans, and it made me really rethink. This happened during the pandemic. You're talking about, we all had this opportunity for self-reflection for a year, and I'm actually kind of sad to lose that, to be honest, because it was like a whole bunch of residencies all at once. But this piece, like when you look at it at first, it's pretty overwhelming, but then you go into it and it's like this, there's these pillows and you're supposed to lounge in it and hang out and feel like be in this space. But it's really about the idea that there's no such thing as a binary, right? And that everything is in this vast spectrum. And, for me, rethinking what does gender mean made me rethink what does everything mean, right? And I think that's one of the things I really love about abstraction. By being non-specific, it allows for conversations to just like go on any meandering path, right? And then you bring it back and then go back again, which, you're talking about the labor, and that's one of the questions we talked about. And so I'll let you take this one first. can we talk a little bit about, I mean, we know this is true for both of us, the hand, right? I mean, we are not, we are not going down the minimalist path here
Yeah.
with our abstraction. It's very, there's a lot of hand in there, and there's a lot of self, right? There's a lot being given
Yeah.
To the viewer. And I'm always so interested in like who takes us up on that, right? I mean, Lisa, you talking about, when you first saw Alicia's work and you were like, oh, I'll take that one up, and I think that that's like how we use the hand to entice the viewer into our world, is also a worthy thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can't help but I'm just, I'm a laborer. Like I had during the pandemic, I worked at a factory as a, screen printer, like I enjoy manual labor. I mean, it's insane, but I do. And so I do not hide that. I'm like, let's go, let's make it bigger and better and more elaborate, and I don't know what that is, or why I have this need to
Okay,
like,
so do you
yeah,
ever think that maybe it's like the Karate Kid, like wash on, wash off? Like, I think that there's this total, you're talking about getting lost in something.
yeah,
I think that there's this total Zen experience of getting compelled by the laboring, and like
yes. It's
it is.
meditative, and it really, I could literally, people don't get that, like I could be working on something for 10 hours. I might eat a little, I might go pee,
Yes.
but I like, it's an obsession almost. It's like, I need to
Yes.
do this.
It is, and I saw Kim Schoenstatt. Yes, of course you're going to scream yes, because you are absolutely 100% in the same ballpark with us. That labor is, it's a meditative form. I mean, and it's like, the first question I always get is, how long did that take you, right? And I'm like, ugh.
No idea.
Well, yeah, no idea, right? But also, like at this point, I kind of say, well, I'm 56. I could never have made the thing that I just made without every single lived experience up until that exact point,
Right.
Oh,
right?
yes.
And so, and there's something about the commodification of our labor that like tries to buy into sort of the capitalist system. And one of the things about that, my experience of having to rethink what gender even is to really look at the intersectionality of patriarchy and capitalism, which we all know is like, the toxic duo, and think like, what does it even mean? Like, I don't know if you sometimes get the questions about archival quality. I mean, with all my paper and ephemeral works, that was always the thing. And I was like, well, maybe it's not about the capitalistic side. Yeah, well, that's a huge piece. That piece took a bunch of people a really long time to make, like months and months and months.
I love it.
And
well, that leads me to a question, because I feel like we as women, or female identifying human, whatever, I get a lot of, well, especially like, I'm not gonna lie, from my mom, my own mom, is like, why don't you make smaller things? Why do you have to go to this scale? And it's almost like I'm supposed to think smaller somehow, in some ways, or people are shocked that I made such a giant thing. And then I'm like, but it's not even that big, it should be bigger. Like it's a tough sell for some people, I think, at first, because they're just like, you're doing that, you did this yourself. I get that question a lot. You do this yourself.
Alicia, do you think that ties into some people when they think about artists and the objects that we make, that the first thought is about selling and us making money, and that if we made smaller things, maybe people would buy them or more people would buy them, right?
Oh
I've
yeah.
gotten that question as well. There are people who have said, well, why don't you make smaller paintings,
Right.
right? Because if you make smaller ones, then the average person could buy them and put them on their walls. Well, the paintings need to be this size for a particular reason, right? This work that Rebecca made needed to be this size, right? The sculptures you make need to be their size. So I'm curious. I'm thinking that's, especially when it comes from loved ones
I know.
who have children who are artists and they want to see us doing well,
Yeah.
that it's about selling, right?
Yeah. It's so true. But I'm like, it's a long game. I'm
Yeah.
playing a long game, and I have to just push through those comments and keep going, and then showing them through the work.
It is the one that I had to sort of process out was my fabricators. The piece that you were showing before, the staircase piece. Yeah, so that's PTFE, which is Teflon. And I had one fabricator who took my my vector and did the water jet cutting of each individual element. I had another fabricator who took these sculptures that support all of the drop down. There's steel inside there, and it goes up to steel plates that attach to the ceiling. And then I had a couple of assistants who were weaving the PTFE line through each element, right, to my exact specifications. Because the fact is, at a certain scale, you can't make it on your own. Yeah. And unfortunately, there are still plenty, the vast majority of fabricators are dudes, and they often do think they know more or better, and there is a certain amount of, no, that's not it, and it needs to look like this, right? And having to sort of put one's foot down and all of that. I have been lucky. You go to the Axis Mundi show. That show, everything there is mine. The large piece in the center, that's the piece that went to Venice. And then the banners, the vinyl tapestries, are the same tapestries that were at LAX. And those are 6 feet tall. The longest one of the tapestries is like 40 some odd feet. And I do think that there is something about, like, I'm 5'2". Alicia, you're also not like massively vertical.
I'm 5'4".
Yeah, you're 5'4". Lisa has, your email is tall, girl, right? But there is something about being vertically challenged and making work that is very large, that I do think in the gut level has something to do with, I refuse to be small, right? Okay. And that's a psychic move, right? Like, I refuse, whatever your social constraint is, whether or not it's because I'm a woman, whether or not it's because I'm actually vertically challenged, whatever it is, I refuse to stay small and not have my voice be really large.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah. And then, like, finding ways to make that kind of an exhilarating and exciting place to be, which I loved very much about Alicia's work too, like, that you can't help but be entranced, right? And that's sort of the goal. It's part of the trick, is once you're in it, you're like, oh, I'm in it, right? And then you own them. Yeah. And you were talking a little bit we were talking a little bit about the storytelling. What did you want to say about that? You brought that up, but
let's see. Well, we had a question about, okay, are you a storyteller? How do you think abstraction helps in the storytelling? And I definitely think, I even grew up going to storytelling festivals. I'm like, I'm like, yeah, I love storytelling, but also, I'm not a performer. I'm not. I went to Cal Arts, and 90% of my cohort is just like doing stuff with their body. Me, it's like I am the labor is the perform. You know what I mean? I'm like doing a lot. That's enough. So the fact that I'm even allowing I've been photographing myself in the works is interesting. But because I'm not performing and speaking the story out loud, I want you to get the story from the pieces. And to do that, I just my clues. I've got these clues. I've got the titles. A title is a clue. The photographs that are embedded are clues. And there's another mask that's in there that has like an old scale, like a literal scale that's just doesn't defunct scale. I'm like, these are the clues, the stories that I'm piecing the story for you to figure out. So yeah, I do think at some level, I'm a storyteller. What about you?
definitely figuring out what the story for each thing is, I think, is integral. Like, oh, the other thing, so like you and I both talked about how we don't really like, it's not architectural in that we don't pre-plan everything. That we have an idea in our head and we follow through. And I think that just that way of working is sort of also kind of story-esque, like the story unfolds, right? I mean, gravity takes its toll in any sculptural work, but the story unfolds. And I feel like I have like a starting point, and then the story tells itself, and I'm like, am I okay with that? Am I not okay with that? Um, I actually did a TED talk about the art, the art of the journey, using cut paper. Did I include the Devil's Workshop in your slides? It's a red piece at the A&D Museum, or did I not include that one? No? Okay. I think bringing people along in the work through the stories that are there. I'm also, the titles are always, there's always a lot of wordplay in the titles, and a bunch of stories that you can play with out of the titles. Like this one, Blanche Descartes, You're So Square, Baby, I Don't Care. I do a lot of work actually about my family, my kid and my husband. And this piece was in many ways honoring my husband. We have been together over 30 years. Wow. And yes, we were babies. And he is, he does probabilities at JPL. So he's very, very math oriented, but he's also like, he's really interested in the creativity that math has in it. And Blanche Descartes was the name of a group of mathematicians in the 20s and 30s who wrote under this name. It was a pseudonym to get some sort of funner ideas about math out. And then You're So Square, Baby, I Don't Care is a Joni Mitchell song. And she's sort of talking about how, like all the artsy people that she hangs out with want to like do all kinds of crazy stuff, but the guy that she actually really loves isn't interested in any of that stuff. He's more, and I was like, I loved the idea that ever so long ago, he and I started at this one little tiny point, right, in the center of this piece. And then our life together has expanded out, right? into the broader world. We've lived in different cities. We've supported each other through, all of our scholarly stuff. And that a lot of people were never going to understand that, about that was like the backstory of this piece, and that our lives together interacted right with a lot of other people, and sometimes it stuck and sometimes it didn't, but that's what life is, and how we sort of do that, how our rippling effect goes, spreads out. So I think that there's a lot of stories inside the work that are there, and then other people will tell me, oh, I got this out of it, and it was something completely different.
Yeah.
And I super love that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We talked about that in our last talk a little bit, about meaning and the audiences or the viewers' engagement in the work. And because we can't control how people engage with the work, or what they see or how they feel, which is, I don't think, is our job. Our job is to make the work and tell the stories. But I think that there are things, as you're telling the story about you and your husband, your experience, I'm looking at the work and I feel that. And I do have a question, since I didn't see this installation. In this little nook area, it looks like you're also playing the scale of the cut pieces of paper much smaller, and as they expand outward, they become larger. Okay, which is really great, right? Because you're playing with depth here and visually, right? Literally with the scale, but pulling us in that way. I think it's really great. How do you guys feel about that? People encountering you, just personally, as an artist, people encountering the work and not understanding it, or needing you to explain it, or having, and you said that was great about people having a totally different experience for you. What are your thoughts about that?
For me, I definitely, I mean, I hope, my hope is that someone will see the work and get something out of it. Now, I have had experiences in the past, like back in like 2017, when I was doing like a summer sculpture program. I was making work more, I was like really looking at the Black female body and thinking about this history, and the work, I was the only person of color in the whole thing. So it was tough. It was very hard to hear some of the things that were being said. And I couldn't talk because of the, structure of the crit. So it was just fascinating, really. It wasn't that I was angry. I was just more like, oh, wow, I'm learning how things are read. So that moment was eye-opening, and so I think that I do, in the back of my mind, have that story or that moment there to remind me, as I'm making a work, like what am I saying? How will this be received? And I don't give a lot of power to it, but that time really, like, kind of has its place in my mind now, where I do think about it a little bit. But ultimately, no, it's not, it's up to us. Like, what do if the work is finished and I believe in it, that's what, really, really ultimately matters.
Rebecca, did you want to respond to that? I do have a question afterwards, and then we're going to go to
and then we've
the
got
audience.
a couple. I would say it goes back to my total understanding that there is no such thing as objective truth. There is no such thing as the one way. Each of us is our own universe, and everything we experience will affect our own read of it. I mean, I don't have the same read from everyone else's creative output that they intended, but if it's meaningful to me, if I connect with it, then that's the goal, right? To me, connections are the goal. And when someone comes to me and says, this is what I get out of your work, sometimes I'm totally baffled, right? But if somebody actually went to it, got something, it's completely different from what I had in my mind, but it meant enough to them to tell me about it, then we connected. And that's really all that matters, right? We had a moment of energy, to go back to the beginning, together. And that makes the world, like, that's the future of hope, right? Like, every single connection. So I'm totally good if people don't get what I got, what my plan was. And I think honestly, I mean, Kim asked about the connection between conceptual work and abstraction. I think those are integral, right? Like, I have a concept of what I want to do, but if I'm not laying it out there, if it's not all completely out there in the wall didactic and it's not completely specific, like it is, I mean, it would drive me crazy if it mattered to me that everybody got exactly what I was trying to get, right? Um, and um, so I think it's awesome. However we connect is awesome.
I have one final question. Alicia, when you started this conversation, you talked about how sculpture allowed you to express yourself basically the way you really organically, naturally, inherently needed to, and that painting didn't do it for you. But when I look at your work, and you didn't say didn't do it to you, but those are my, that sculpture allowed you to tap into, I'm paraphrasing here, energy that allowed you to process that in a different way. But when I look at your work, and I think also it's because you're using resin, like there are some areas here that read to me as wet, right? Because of the resin, and it feels like wet paint. And when I'm looking here, I see the lines that are being created and read them as brushstrokes. When I'm looking at Rebecca's work, it was especially in this one, this blue line down the middle, it feels like a drawing has come to life. And I love this piece. And I saw this piece at Rebecca's in her studio, and then at Durden and Ray, walking through, it felt like I was walking through this drawing that came to life. Do you guys make any of these associations for yourself?
100%.
Yeah.
There is no way anyone could see Walden or any of my wire works as not being drawings in space. I mean, Richard Tuttle did wire drawings in space eons ago. I love the idea of drawing in space. I mean, I was one of those kids that like, I loved having a flashlight and doing this really fast at night, right? Because the eye sort of creates a drawing as you're doing that. And that is kind of magical. The idea that you could draw three-dimensionally, I think is a magical thing. And it's part of that, the hand as well, like a continued homage to the act of making.
Yeah, I feel like for me, if you see, because I still draw and I still paint sometimes when I make the time, but if you see those like very two-dimensional drawings or paintings, they're very much like the sculptures. So I feel like I'm my world is, I'm in my world, you know what I mean? Whether I'm doing whatever art it is that I'm doing, you can see my hand in it. You know that it's from me, because a lot of the paintings and drawings have so much line work, so much detail, tiny lines. So and I still use I started to just sort of recycle the paintings into a sculptural form. And so now the paintings themselves have become material, like not even a painting anymore.
Right.
Just, I'm cutting them into strips, so I'm still a painter at heart. I miss painting sometimes, but I gotta do my sculptures.
Yes, they need to be made. Okay, so you guys, let's whatever questions you have, please put them in the chat and we will read them and respond. Kim, Rebecca touched on a bit Kim's question about the overlap between conceptual art and abstraction. Kim, did you want to unmute yourself and share with us a little bit of what you're thinking as well to join the conversation?
Thank you. And you two are amazing. And Lisa, always amazing. Yeah, I think what I was wondering is, you know, Lisa, when you started these conversations, I was like, oh, it's just about abstract art. I only have to think about abstract art. And then, you know, as Rebecca and Alicia were talking, you both very rooted in the conceptual sort of process, right? You both have this idea about what you want to do, you employ different materials, and yet you're still realizing your works abstractly. And so I wanted to touch upon this sort of like grabbing from different genres of art practice to combine them into output. I hope I'm making sense. I'm a little tired today.
Well, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, you know, okay, so I come out of craft originally, right? My BFA and MFA are sculptural ceramic. And but I'm also profoundly interested in cultures and civilizations and what each was trying to accomplish in their work. Of all things, I am currently rewatching the like 1967 Kenneth Clark Civilization series because that shit makes me excited. It's super dated, it's super colonial, it's super all that stuff. But thinking about what each civilization, each kind of civilization was trying to communicate, what they were trying to get out there idea wise, I can't imagine making work without both. Let me see if I can say this more clearly. When I was in grad school in the late 90s, there were certain, you know, and I was at UCLA, there were certain staff that were dead set against anything craft related. And then there were certain other staff that were like, bring it on. And one of the things I talked about a lot was that we had reached a period of time with work like Mike Kelly's where we had really evolved out of like looking at a certain kind of craftsmanship. And, you know, like we were always trying to get to the most realistic painting and then we did it and then we tore it apart again, right? I mean, that's just what we do continually. But the utilitarian object was left out of most of 20th century art criticism. And I kind of kept saying, we are ripe for reinvestigating this history of the utilitarian and the history of just objects in general, outside of the kind of 20th century Marxist, you know, the kind of stuff we had been doing. And that's how things kind of blew up, right? In the 21st century, we've really been doing a lot of that. And it's led to some really great new ways of making. But I think that long term, that conversation is always part of what's happening in art, like how we remember history and bring it forward. And you have to have those concepts in your head you have to juggle all of that stuff in your head to make new work. Does that help?
I love you. I think for me, it's going back to something Rebecca said earlier, which is it's life experience. Like I'm utilizing all I'm also from craft background as well, you know, and how, you know, each life experience, whether I was, you know, doing the hand painted clothing, like some of those elements come into play sometimes in the sculptural work, or, you know, maybe it's my knowledge of like my jewelry stuff. Some of those components are coming into play. Maybe it's the painting coming into play. Maybe it's my previous screen printing job, the materials themselves that I'm saving from that job coming into play. Like all of and I also studied anthropology and painting. So I also have this interest in cultures and functional craft, and looking at those processes. And so it's just each and every work, like you said before, is like your whole life in this work, you know. But also I think that my bringing in all of these elements is solution oriented. Like if I'm doing something, I'm like, how do I get this thing to do this other thing? What's the method I can bring in? Maybe it's, you know, I'm drawing a blank of ideas, but just, you know, maybe it's some random thing that I did out of clay years ago. Like that technique needs to come into play, you know. So it's really like, what is, you know, as I'm working, it's solution to the next thing.
So I have a question for the person in the back of the auditorium that's listening to this conversation. In concise language, why abstraction? Because a lot of the things that you guys are talking about could be done, created with representational imagery or something that's much more familiar. Why abstraction?
I don't think it could be done representationally. I just don't.
Yeah.
I think that.
Well, I mean, and on some sense, right? We have Walden, and you have a forest that's about gender. Someone could have, I think, you know, someone could have made a forest that is very surface level with these bodies, right? And we read them as female and male and non-gender, whatever. But you chose to use wire and to make this space with these drawings that we could walk through. There are colors that could be interpreted for people who are thinking in binary ways, right? That pink is, and this is a really great installation, right? You guys, like I said, I did see it and I walked through it. And what is really great about, I'm just gonna kind of go into my personal experience real quickly. What is really great about this is we do have these wires with colors that are familiar. We could easily say, oh, pink is for female or girl, boys for male or blue, right? And oh, you know, the white is for non-gender binary. But when you walk through this, it becomes this experience, and you literally are captivated by these sculptures that are hanging around you, and you're looking up and you resonate with a particular. I've resonated with a couple of them, right, Rebecca? And I'm like, I want this one. I know where I want it. And you resonate with this particular, I'm just going to call them drawings, these drawings in space. But you might resonate with the blue one or the red one or the white one or the black one. And what does it mean that I've resonated with this blue one? Is this, if I'm thinking, if I'm staying on the surface, right? And I'm just thinking of people who have to, maybe who haven't had certain experiences, or, you know, we all, whatever, we all have certain ways of thinking. I've resonated with this blue one. What does that mean? Is this, is this a gender? Is it just an emotion? Is it an energy that just happens to have this blue color, right? So I think that some of these can be, for the way some people process, created with very representational imagery. And I guess, again, for the person in the back of the room who's afraid to ask the question, who's new to art, why abstraction? Why were these lines important to talk about gender? Why are these shapes, right? And this glistening resin and these circles and these flame looking lines and this color important to talk about DNA?
I mean, I think you, as you were describing her installation, I think you kind of hit on it right there, which is you were having an experience. And I think that if, you know, a lot of times, not to say that you can't have an experience with the representational painting, but I do think when you have a very, you know, hyper realistic painting, you're kind of being told what it is. Mm-hmm. You're being told the story. And I think that the stories that we're telling are so much more in depth than just here is a figure in a setting. I think we're trying to capture something that is untangible sometimes, but also pull you back into the tangible. So we're trying to play with emotion and, you know, visuality and like texture and all these things to get you into a feeling. And I think that abstraction really opens the door to allowing that to happen. You know, I think it's more expansive. There's way more opportunity and as somebody who just needs to experiment with materials. I'm not a scientist, but I definitely, like, in my next life, maybe I would be, and I as somebody who needs that, I get bored, and I don't want to. I could paint a hyper real painting, but for what? Like, everyone's doing that. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because everyone's
I
doing it,
understand.
but just for myself, I'm like, I can't. My brain is like, no, you can't just do that. You have to. What more? What more? What
Yeah.
more? Yeah.
Thank you. Go
I
ahead.
think that ultimately, if we are trying to initiate conversations, both of us, and they're about a whole lot of things that a whole lot of people have a whole lot of different feelings about. And I think that abstraction allows us to not be so prescriptive in how we want our viewers to feel, right? I think that abstraction allows for a multiplicity, like it allows for the journey without telling someone what the destination is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And
I like that. Abstraction allows, because
I know, I'm
this,
like,
so this is
you're
gonna be the
hired.
next quote that we're going to put on the page. So abstraction allows for the journey without telling
without being prescriptive about
without
the destination.
about the destination.
Because I
All
just,
right.
fundamentally, it's not my job to tell other people how to think. It's
Right.
just my job to put some stuff out there and see what lands, right?
Yes, I like that. All right, well, thank you. See, we needed to hear it from you because the people showed up for you guys. They don't want to hear it from me. Okay, so Amy asks, I am guessing you are both very organized. Do you ever struggle with having too much to work with or refuse donated materials?
Oh,
I know, God. I'm like, well, for me, I do try to be as organized as possible, because my space, even though I do have a nice size studio space, I still have a lot of stuff. So I have to renegotiate the space constantly, and so because of that, I have to be a little bit organized. And what happens is it gets messy, and then I have to take a day or two to get it all together. And so I have these moments of, like, messy, okay, it's clean. I go through these cycles. But there was one other part of the question, I'm sorry.
do you ever refuse donated materials?
Oh yeah, I've had to, because of space, and it hurts. It hurts, because I probably just need a whole warehouse, a bigger, another warehouse space just for the stuff, because it's hard. Like, you just don't know. I might need this giant thing that somebody gave me. So I do have, but I have to make executive decisions where I'm like, all right, this gotta go, because I just can't make the space for this anymore. And that's really tough.
Yeah.
I think that it's an ongoing question. All of my sculpture friends that do use some kinds of reclaimed materials, we're always kind of checking in on each other, like, okay, is this hoarder level, or is this still just storing essential materials level? Because
Right.
somebody like, do I need an intervention, or am I still okay?
I can relate to that.
I think all artists, I mean, I know I've got friends who, like, have tried to offer me, like, 30-year-old dry pigments from glazes, right? Like, artists don't get rid of stuff because we may use it, like, we may evolve and change, and it's not cheap. But yes, I have also refused some, and most of the woodworkers I work with now, like, they know I don't want rectangles. I want the weird shit, the weird offcuts, the the live edges, the bizarre shapes. Because I have an amount of regular shapes that worries my husband. Yes.
All right, I think we have one more question from Olivia Booth. Olivia, did you have a question? I'm always going to call on Olivia. But what was the name of that nighttime talk show. Is it Jimmy Kimmel, who at the end of the show would always say, we didn't have time for Leonardo DiCaprio. Every time we have a talk, if Olivia's here, she's gonna be our last question.
I love it.
Olivia Booth, what is our last
my
question?
second disappointing moment with you and this conversation. I don't have a question. It was such a thoughtful, wonderful conversation. I have a bunch of scribbly notes on diagonals that I wrote from everything you said. I can send you an image of that, but thank you so much.
Aw.
All righty. Is there anyone who has a last question? All righty. So you guys, someone. Oh, Virginia Cat says thank you. And she did make a comment earlier, right? And it was about scale, and that it might be more about people being able to afford smaller works, and that most people don't have space in their homes for larger works. That really goes back to what we were saying earlier also. But as the artist, if this work is telling you these materials, and as you combine them, build them, assemble them, paint them, tell you they need to be large, you're making the work that really needs to be made, right?
Yeah. And we do make some small things too.
Yeah.
They're just, they're not as sexy. You got 10 images. We're going to give you the sexiest ones.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, LA Art Documents, for your wonderful comments. And so everyone, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. You do amazing.
Thank you, but don't hang up yet, because we have two little announcements here. So you guys, currently on view, Alicia is in a group exhibition curated by Essence Hardin. It's called Blues, and it's at the El Segundo Museum of Art, and you can see that through March the 26th. And then Rebecca is in, are we considering that group? I mean, it's your work, but there are four other LA artists. I mean, it's worldwide, first of all.
It is. It's an international Terrain Exhibitions is a project that was started by Sabina Ott,
Chicago, right?
who unfortunately is no longer with us, in Chicago. The idea was to take artworks outside of galleries and museums and put them into communities, particularly in people's front lawns, so that neighbors would talk to each other and get to know each other and create more connections and communities, which would foster cultural exchange. And it has grown. This is the second time I've done Terrain Biennial, and I will always do it. If anybody else in LA wants to work on the 23 one together, I'd love to see it expand.
I think it would be great, because it shows only 4 people in LA. It's up through the 15th, so we can drive by. So here's the
mine's going to be up longer, I have to say.
Right.
Mine will be up longer.
So you guys just go to terrainexhibitions.org. There is a link or a button, this yellow button, to find the current locations, and you choose LA. They're all over, you'll see. And then you'll see 4, and you'll see Rebecca's current installation, which looks really wonderful. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. This was fabulous. We'll see you next month for Victoria May's conversation on the 12th of December. You guys have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.